So, hello world and hello Philippines chart. So, good day everyone. So, my name, teka nagsuwi. So, my name is Jamari A. Katindig and I am going to report for today's video, for today's discussion. So, the subject is PCE 322 Hydrology, and my topic for today's discussion, or I'm going to report, is about the temperature, time variation, and measurement. So before mag-proceed sa akong report is i-define sa nato ano ni next. Okay, so i-define sa nato kung unsa ang temperature. So I know na discuss na ni siya sa last reporter, which is Giza J. Estelioso. So ano na siya, recap lang ni siya. So sige, so temperature, it is a physical quantity that expresses the degree of hotness or coldness of a substance. It is the manifestation of thermal energy present in all matter, which is the source of occurrence of heat, a flow of energy when a body is in contact with another that is colder or hotter. So take note that the temperature should never be confused with the heat. So again, temperature, it expresses the um, hotness or coldness of a certain object, while heat is, again, nag-focus lang siya sa kainit. So, proceed ta. So this is my topic. So the variations of temperature. So temperature variation. So the amount of solar energy received by any region varies with time of day, with seasons, and with latitude. These differences in solar energy create temperature variations. Temperatures also vary with differences in topographical surface and with latitude. Oh, kana ay ma-siopaw jud ka karon. So, sorry. So, these temperature variations create forces that drives the atmosphere in endless motion. So, temperature, there are many factors that affect our temperature variations. So, example sa factors na nag-affect sa temperature is the rotation of the Earth. Then this is seasonal changes. Next is the latitude. Tapos na topographical surface, and last is the altitude. So may next is journal variation. So there are 5 types of temperature variation. So the first is the journal variation. Next is the seasonal variation. Third is the variations with latitude. Fourth is the topography. And last is the variations with altitude. So first is the journal variation. So journal variation. So journal, it is comes from the Latin word journales, which means daily. So ang journal meaning is day, or kumbaga buntag. So journal variation is the change in temperature from day to night brought about by the daily rotation of the Earth. The Earth receives heat during the day by the solar radiation but continually loses heat by terrestrial radiation. Warming and cooling depend on an imbalance of solar and terrestrial radiation. During the day, solar radiation exceeds terrestrial radiation and the surface becomes warmer. At night, solar radiation ceases, but terrestrial radiation continues and cools the surface. Cooling continues after sunrise until solar radiation again exceeds terrestrial radiations. Minimum temperature usually occurs after sunrise, sometimes as much as 1 hour after. The continued cooling after sunrise is one reason that fog sometimes forms shortly after the sun is above the horizon. We will have more to say about the generations and topographic surfaces. So journal variation, ang meaning is it is a temperature, a change of temperature from day to night. Again, syempre pag mabalaan mo na to ang temperature pag buntag and buntag to hapon, ang temperature ginato ma-experience is way warmer or kumbaga init atong ma-experience. Unlike kung paggabi or pagkadlawon ang atong mga ma-experience na atong ma-feel na temperature is mas lamig. So naka-affect siya sa ato ang temperature. So mo ato ang ay mo atong maong nagabari ang temperature every day because of the rotation of the earth. Mo ang reason mong naga-change ang temperature day by day. So next is the seasonal variation. So in addition to its daily rotation, the earth revolves in a complete orbit around the sun each year. So since the axis of the earth tilts to the plane of orbit, the angle of incident solar radiation varies seasonally between hemispheres. The northern hemisphere is warmer in June, July, and August because it receives more solar energy than the southern hemisphere. During December, January, and February, the southern hemisphere experiences opposite. So it receives more solar energy and is warmer. So again, kagain na ang journal variation is nagavary siya day to day or every day. So kani nagavary siya seasonal. So kung every June, July, August, and then kung imuhang place is nakalocate sa northern hemisphere, ang imong ma-experience na temperature is um, init. So kung unlike sa kung imuhang place is naaka sa baba or sa southern hemisphere, imuhang during June, July, August, imong ma-experience na temperature, ma- ma-feel na temperature is cooler or mas lamig sa unlike sa southern hemisphere ay northern hemisphere rather. So during naman December, January and February, kabaliktaran siya. So, inversely proportional. So, during December, January, and February, kung naakas, imuhang place is under Northern Hemisphere, imong ma-feel or ma-experience na pod na mga imong temperature is cooler or mas lamig. Unlike sa Southern Hemisphere na ilang ma-experience during December, January, and February is init. So, again, ang relationship is inversely proportional ilahang ang relationship sa Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere in terms sa seasonal changes of temperature. So, saan na to? Wait lang. So, this figure for this figure is for seasonal variation. So, seasonal variation. So, this figure shows a worldwide average surface of temperatures in July. In Northern Hemisphere, continents generally are warmer than oceanic areas at corresponding latitudes. So the reverse is true in the Southern Hemisphere, but the contrast is not evident because of the sparsity of the surface. So again, kung during June, July, August, ang mga nasa Northern Hemisphere is maka-experience of warmer temperature unlike sa Southern Hemisphere. Then kung again, tama nasa so maoto. Next is ano ba? Another figure for seasonal variation. So um this figure is a worldwide average surface temperatures in January when the northern hemisphere is in cold season and the southern hemisphere is in warm season. Note that the northern hemisphere continents are colder than oceanic areas at corresponding latitudes, and in southern hemisphere continents are warmer than oceans. So dire kung imuhang place is um ay during December, January and February, kung imong place is under nasa northern hemisphere, ang imong ma-experience na temperature is mas lamig. Pero kung imong place, kung naa ka sa northern hemisphere pero imong place is coastal or kung duol sa dagat, is dili kayo lamig like sa Philippines. Under man ta sa northern hemisphere pero ato ang country is coastal country man ta. So ato ang ma-experience na lamig is kung i-rate nato out of 10, siguro mga nasa 7 or 8 lang ato ang ma-experience na lamig during December. Unlike kung imong country is kanang dili coastal countries, so ma-experience na lamig out of 10 is siguro 10 out of 10 or siguro mas lamig pa kay, di ba? Kay naga-snow man good na sa iba na countries. So kung imuhang place naman during December, January and February is naka sa southern hemisphere, is ma-feel is init or warm. But kung imuhang place is under coastal again pero naka sa southern hemisphere, is mas mainit imong ma-experience again pag imuhang place is mas duol sa tubig or sa ocean, mas init imuhang ang ma-feel kay naamay good ang hangin sa dagat is padulong sa kung asa na place ang duol sa sa dagat. So naa siya kumbaga ang temperature is humid or humidity. Next or third na types is the variation with latitude. So the shape of the earth causes a geographical variation in the angle of incident solar radiation. Since the earth is essentially spherical, the sun is more nearly heat, overhead in equatorial regions than at higher latitudes. Excuse. Equatorial regions therefore receives the most radiant energy and are warmest. Slanting rays of the sun is at higher latitudes deliver less energy over a given area, with the least being received at the poles. Thus, temperature varies with latitude from the warm equator to the cold. So, ang latitude is isa pod siya sa factor na na maka-affect sa temperature variation sa sa Earth, because kung ang imuhang place is again ang Earth is naka-tilt siya 23.5 degree. So pag ang sun na degree, hindi makita ang sun. So ano na lang, ang direct ray of sun or ang sikat sa araw kung paadto sa earth is not equal distribution, kay ang matodohan lang og sikat ng araw is katong naa sa center, which is the equatorial areas. So kung naa ka sa equatorial areas, ang imuhang ma-experience is init jud kaayo, kay dito lang man naga-focus ang rays of sun. Unlike kung naa ka sa mga south pole or north poles, imuhang ma-experience na temperature is dili kayo init, kay dili man kay ka masikatan og araw, kumbaga kay ang Kaya ang Earth is agani nakatilt siya. So unfair ang distribution or not unequal ang distribution sa rays of sun. So kung naka sa equator again, ulit naman po ay naka sa equatorial regions, imuhang ma-experience um, na temperature or mga climate is init jud. So mo lang. So next is the variations with again topography. So not related to movement or shape of the earth are temperature variations induced by water and terrain. As stated earlier, water absorbs and radiates energy with less temperature changes than does land. Large, deep water bodies tend to minimize temperature changes while continents favor large changes. Wet soil such as in swamps and marshes is almost as effective as water in suppressing temperature changes. Thick vegeta- thick vegetation tends to control temperature changes since it contains some water and it also insulates um, against heat transfer between the ground and the atmosphere. Arid, barren surface permit to the greatest temperature changes. So topographic isa po ang topography sa na factor na maka-affect sa ato ang temperature variation. So kumbaga kung ang imuhang again pag imuhang place is coastal areas is more likely maka-experience kag warm na temperature kay again na ang imuhang place is duol sa tubig-tubig ang hangin na maagto sa imo ikaw na pinakaduol sa dagat or mga tubig-tubig. So, kung ganun pang ingon, char, is init and kumaga humid imuhang ma-experience. So, but then kung na imuhang lugar is nasa layo, dili kay ka ma-experience og kanang init. Kumaga less likely to experience warm temperature. So, continue. Paano na mabasa? So, these topographical influence are both diurnal and seasonal. So for example, the difference between a daily maximum and minimum may be at 10 degrees or less over water near a shoreline or over a swamp or a marsh, while a difference of 50 degrees or more is common over rocky or sandy deserts. Sure to note that in the northern hemisphere in July, temperatures are warmer over continents than over oceans. In January, they are colder over continents than over oceans. The opposite is true when the southern hemisphere, but not as pronounced because of more water surface in the southern hemisphere. So, what no? Again, gi-explain ako kay na pag naka sa northern hemisphere, during June, July, August, imong temperature na ma-experience is more likely warm. While kung naka sa Southern Hemisphere, imong ma-experience is cold. But during December, January, and February, imong ma-experience na mga temperature kung naka sa Northern Hemisphere is colder than the Southern Hemisphere. So next is also, this is the figure for topographic um, ano, topographic variation. So temperature differences create air movement and time and cloudiness. So again, kung nakakadool sa dool ka sa tubig-tubig or sa ocean, kung yung place is the coastal areas, mas init yun imuhang ma-experience na temperature. So mga to. Next is the variation with altitude. So temperature normally decreases with increasing altitude throughout the troposphere. This decrease of temperature with altitude is defined as lapse rate. The average decrease of temperature, average lapse rate in the troposphere is 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000 feet. But since this is an average, the exact value seldom exists. In fact, temperature sometimes increases with a height through a layer. An increase in temperature with altitude is defined as inversion. Lapse rate is inverted. So another, this is the last type of temperature variations. So altitude is isa sa factor jud siya na maka-affect sa temperature kay ang altitude and temperature there is relationship between the two. So the relation between altitude and temperature is inversely proportional. Kumbaga, if the altitude is if the higher the altitude, the lower its temperature. The lower its altitude, the higher its temperature. So kumbaga, kung imong place or imong location or kung asa bang ka is nasa taas, kumbaga bundok-bundok, imong ma-experience na temperature is lamig or cold, cold or cool. Pero kung naa ka sa baba or kung nasa city-city lang, city, yung ma-experience na temperature is init. So again, the relationship between the two is inversely proportional to each other or from each other. So mao to ang 5 types of temperature variation. So mag-proceed ta sa next topic. Ay, napaday gini. Ay, di ba tayo mag-proceed? So, napa siya yung dugtong. So, an inversion often develops near the ground on clear, cool nights when wind is light. The ground radiates and cools much faster than the overlying air. Air in contact with the ground becomes cold while in the temperature a few hundred feet above changes very little. Thus, temperature increases with height. Inversions may also occur at any altitude when conditions are favorable. For example, a current of warm air aloft overrunning cold air near the surface produces an inversion aloft. For figure 7 diagrams, temperature in inversion both surface and aloft. Inversions are common in the stratosphere. Again, motto in kagay na inverse proportional ang altitude kag temperature. So mo ni ang figure na ginamin nila kagay. Ginamin ako. So kamo na bahala magsabat. Hindi ko mo mag-explain ani. So mo na siya. So again, mo to tanan na types of types of variation temperature variation. So mag-proceed ta sa next topic which is the measurements of the temperature. So temperature, it is the measurement of it is the measure of hotness and coldness of an object. Temperature can be measured in metric units or in US customary units. We can use a thermometer that has Celsius, Fahrenheit, that has a scale Celsius, Fahrenheit scale to measure the temperature. The following table shows the different temperatures on Celsius and Fahrenheit. So the normal body temperature in Fahrenheit is 98 Fahrenheit and in Celsius 37 degrees Celsius. So the room temperature is 68 degree Fahrenheit and sa Celsius is 20 degrees Celsius. And And kung ang water is nasa boiling point na siya in Fahrenheit, the temperature is 212 degree Fahrenheit while in Celsius 100 degrees Celsius mao nang boiling point 100 degrees Celsius. So kung freezing point naman, freezing in Fahrenheit is 32 degrees lang siya while in in dapat 2020 in ang freezing point sa degrees kay 0 degrees Celsius. So, na siya sa 0. So, the temperature conversion formula. So, if you want to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit, Fahrenheit to Celsius, Celsius to Kelvin, Kelvin to Celsius, Fahrenheit to Kelvin, and Kelvin to Fahrenheit, you can use this equation in order to solve or to convert the temperature. So, ano siya? Next is the instrument used in measuring temperature. So there are 5. So dagan man siya pero 5 lang akong gipili kay dagan na kayo. So first is the thermometers, next is the Stevenson screen, next is the maximum minimum thermometer, next is the pyrometer, and last is the thermograph. So first is the buti ka mag-next for today's video. So first is the thermometer. Thermometer is an instrument that measures temperature, malamang. It can measure the temperature of a solid such as food, a liquid such as water, or a gas such as air. The 3 most common units of measurement for temperature are Celsius, Fahrenheit, and Kelvin. So, abo naman ta ang temperature is mo ani nakakita naman siguro ta ani kasi gan ginagamit mga kung i-check gusto nimo i-check imong body temperature mo to ang digital temperature, and then kaning nasa peak is mo ni tang ginagamit sa mga malls kung magsulod ka, di ba, kanang pusil-pusil. So para mabalaan imong temperature. So, mao to. Proceed ta sa next, which is the Stevenson screen. So, a Stevenson screen or instrument shelter is a shelter on an enclosure to meteorological instrument against precipitation and direct heat radiation from outside sources, while still allowing air to circulate freely around them. It forms part of standard weather station and holds instruments that may include thermometers, ordinary or maximum thermometers, a hygrometer, a psychrometer, a dew cell, a barometer, and a thermograph. So ang Stevenson um, screen or instrument shelter is kumbaga more siya cabinet or more siya storage for other instrument, measuring instruments such as thermometers, hygrometers, psychrometers, and others. So ang Stevenson screen gina-use po ni siya usahay pag kuwag temperature ko nang sa mga weather forecaster. So mao na ang Stevenson screen. Next is the maximum minimum temperature. So maximum and minimum temperature is a registering thermometer that can record the maximum and minimum temperatures reached over a period of time. For examples, 24 hours. It is used to record the extremes of temperature at location. For instance, in meteorology and horticulture, it was invented by the British scientist James VI in 1780. The same basic design remains in use. It is also commonly known as maximum minimum, minimum maximum, maxima minima, or minima maxima. Sumuka to ay thermometer, of which it is the earliest practical design. The thermometer indicates the current temperature and the highest and lowest temperature since the last reset. So, maximum and minimum thermometer mo na siyang ginagamit para ma-record ang temperature for a day or kung kanus aman imong gusto. So ibutang nimo siya halimbawa sa inyong gawas sa balay, then mabalaan niya ang temperature sa buong araw kung asa nag-peak ang temperature, kung asa ng highest highest point of temperature and asa ang pinaka lowest point of temperature. Halimbawa sa isa ka day ang mabalaan niya during alas 3 sa hapon, ang temperature nga na time is nag-abot siya 45 degrees. Then pag ang ma-record niya na pinaka-lowest na temperature is nasa 4 a.m. So katutanan na temperature is ma-record to niya. So dito ni mababalaan kung asa ang pinakainit na time and asa ang pinakalamig na time. So mao na ang used or ang function function sa maximum minimum thermometer. So next instrument is the pyrometer. So a pyrometer is a type of remote sensing thermometer used to measure the temperature of distant objects. Various forms of pyrometers have historically existed. In the modern usage, it is a device um, that from a distance determines the temperature of a surface from the amount of thermal radiation it emits, a process known as a pyrometry and sometimes radiometry. So, ang pyrometer is kaya niya ma-detect or makuha ang temperature kung unsa pa man nakalayo or ang isa ka object is kang layo. So, halimbawa, ang imuhang gusto na i-measure na instrument pero um, ang layo kay sa imuha or di ka gusto mo lapit dito ana sa isa ka object. So, ang pyrometer kaya ito niya i-measure even though kaano pa ka layo iyahang or ang distance sa imuha. So, mo na ang function sa pyrometer. So, kaya niya i-measure ang temperature miskang gaano kalayo ang distance. Then the next or the last instrument is the thermograph. It is an instrument that gives a continuous record of temperature for a day or for a week. The device uses a helical strip of two metals with differing coefficients of expansions. The resulting opening and closing of the coil operates a pen which produces a line over a calibrated chart on the clock around clock drum. So a thermograph, it is used to sense, measure, and records temperature of the atmosphere. It is also known as a recording thermometer. So kaya niya mag-record of temperature buong week. So again, more siya katong sa tugay na maximum minimum. So more siya combination kaya niya ma-detect kung as ang highest point of temperature and the lowest point temperature within the day or within the week. So also ginagamit po ata ang thermograph for medical use para mabalaan kung hanba sa mga radio dili mabalaan ang mga sakit char. So next, that would be all. So before na ako mag-end sa presentation kay i-summarize lang sa nako ako ang report. So akong report is temperature, time variation, and its measurement. So there are 5 types of um, temperature variations. First is the journal variation. Second is the seasonal variation. Third is the variation with latitude. Third is the variation with topography. And last is the variation with altitude. So, and also in measurement of temperature, there are 3 scales in order to know or to measure the temperature, which is the Kelvin, Celsius, and the Fahrenheit. And there are also instruments, or there are 5 instruments used in measuring temperature. In my report, sa akong report lang ha. So, first is the thermometer, mga pinakasikat. Then, second is the Stephenson's screen. Next is the maximum and minimum thermometer. Fourth is the pyrometer. And last is the thermograph. So, that's the end of my um, presentation. I hope you learned something. So that will be all. Again, thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube chat, Charis. Hindi. That will be all. Thank you.